Okay. Good evening, good evening, good evening. This is our DFW Metro NAACP meeting for June. Today is June the 15th. I see Mr. Foster has joined us, and we're glad to see you. This is your first meeting too, correct? Yes, yes. So y'all, we got a couple of new people on here today. We're excited that you could join us as well. Mr. Foster is a part of CAP. He's part, so he's already family. So I'm looking forward to you all joining us today. We are going to officially call this meeting to order. And I'm gonna tell you all right now, I may do a lot of things well, but all this parliamentary stuff, y'all gonna have to bear with me, okay? So I'm gonna try to do this, do this properly. So you all, we're gonna work through it together. So I am officially, I am the president, Crystal Bates of DFW Metro NAACP. We are going to officially call this meeting to order at 6:07 on June 15th, 2021. And we're going to, if anybody wants to offer our invocation, our vice president was going to, but he is running a little bit late. And so if anybody else would like to say a prayer for us, feel free to go ahead and do so.
I can do that.
Thank you.
This evening, dear Lord, we come with bowed heads and with humble hearts just to say thank you for this gathering. We thank you, Lord, for Ms. Bates, Father, that called this meeting in order. We pray, oh Lord, you just bless her and keep her in your arms of protection. Bless those that join in. And we ask you, Lord, to let this meeting be what you have it to be. And we'll be careful to give you all the praise and glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Look at there. I like folks to come in the door doing stuff. So thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. We appreciate that. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. I hope they're still doing that. Okay. So we welcomed some of our guests just a second ago. We have Mr. Foster. If you'd like to say hello, you all feel free to do so. We have Mr. Henderson, Mr. Thomas, Henry Thomas, I'm sorry. And if anybody would like to say hello, you are more than welcome to do so at this time. But we are definitely glad to have you all.
Hello, my name is Christopher Marshall. I'm from the Dallas branch of the NAACP.
Thank you, Christopher, for joining. Christopher works with me with Our Vote, Our Voice. He also is a recent master's graduate from UNT. So we want to applaud you for that. So thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us. Me and Chris have been in meetings already since 3, and he probably was in meetings before 3. So thank you so much for taking time to join us. We appreciate that.
No problem.
Anybody else have a word?
Hi, Crystal. I'm like you said, I'm Johnny Foster. I'm actually the VP of Public Affairs at CAP. I notice our president, Leah Montez, is on as well. She doesn't have her camera on, but it's a pleasure to be with you guys this afternoon. And thank you for the invitation.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Anybody else? And then we're going to say thank you again to Mr. Thomas for opening us up in prayer. If you'd like to have a word at this time.
I am Henry Thomas. I'm currently I'm the athletic director at the Gainesville State School. I guess I'm kind of part of the NAACP here in Denton. Our president is Reverend Husband, and he's kind of sickly now, but he's great with all the different things that goes on in our city. And I'm also the pastor of Hamilton Chapel Baptist Church there in Frisco, Texas. So kind of got a full plate, but I saw what you guys were doing, and I'm definitely interested, so I had to join in. So I thank y'all for letting me in tonight.
Oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. And I will be praying for you all as president. I think I do have a number for him. I haven't had the opportunity to meet him in person, but we have had a brief conversation. So I'll make sure to let him know that he's in my prayers and tell him hello. And you all had, oh my gosh, I just messed up. Dean, Mr. Kennedy Dean. He had been visiting with us for quite some time. So we miss him dearly. They've moved, so we miss them dearly. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
do we happen to have any June birthdays and anniversaries? Not this time? Oh, wow. Well, we're going to go right ahead into y'all know I'm excited. So for those of you that
Crystal,
are new, oh, yes, I'm sorry. Mhm.
me, I'm sorry. I thought I was on mute. My birthday is Thursday.
Happy birthday, Paige. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Happy birthday to you. How old are you going to be? 21?
I'm proud. I'm gonna be 39.
Awesome. Happy birthday to you, Paige. So Paige is blessing us with our youth. For those of you that are new today, one thing that I feel we got to create our own narrative. We got to be responsible for making sure our history is shared. And forever, it has always been my passion. Because it is one of my lacks. My weaknesses is not knowing as much history as I would like. I think there's always room for us to know more Black history. And so God gave me this space. And so I decided to make sure we had space in all of our meetings to have a Black History moment. And I would like for that moment to be shared by our youth going forward. We've had so many of you who have stepped in and volunteered your time to fill in that space. But today we get to have one of our area youth, Ms. Paige Dixon's son, Mr. David Long, is going to share our Black History moment today. And so we are super duper excited. If you all know of any other youth, please connect them. All we need is about 4 to 5 minutes of their time to share a Black History moment. And we can also give them a community service time effort for it because they have to prepare for it. So just let us know. But we are so excited and we welcome them to also join in this opportunity. So now we're going to give, with no further ado, we're going to give the floor to David.
Hello. Tonight's Black History moment is about Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander. She was the first African American woman to receive a PhD in the United States. In 1921, she was the first African American to receive a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. In 1927, she was also the first African American to enroll and earn a law degree in the University of Pennsylvania. In 1943, she was the first woman to hold a national office in the National Bar Association. Alexander was active in the civil rights movement and was appointed to President Harry Truman's Committee of Human Rights in 1947. In this position, Alexander helped to develop the concept of the National Civil Rights Policy when she co-authored the report to secure these rights. In the report, Alexander argues that Americans, regardless of gender or race, should be granted the opportunity to improve themselves and in doing so, strengthen the United States.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Now, David, would you like to take any questions from anybody? Or at least tell us what grade you're in.
I'm in ninth grade and I'm going into 10th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate you being a brave soul to get here in front of all of us strangers and do such a wonderful presentation. And I'm excited because not too many folks that look like me and you have economics degrees, and I happen to be one of them. So I was really excited to hear about Miss Alexander also holding an economics degree, because I too was the 9th African-American female to get an economics degree from UTA. And so I am super excited. So this was excellent for you to be able to share this information with us. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you and we enjoyed it. You all give Mr. Long a hand. Awesome. Thank you, Paige. So now we're going to move forward. Thank you. We're going to move forward and have our Juneteenth speaker, celebration speaker for this evening, none other than Mr. Daniel Keelan. And so, Daniel, we are excited to have you. You all, this is going to be so interesting. I'm excited. I've already heard some of his information, but I know he has some other stuff that I may not know about. So you all sit back and let's give Mr. Daniel Keelan a hand. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here with you guys. Again, my name is Daniel Keeling. A little bit about myself. I started out at, I have a degree from Dallas Baptist University, and I started out at East Texas State University, where I got a history degree also. So history is kind of my hobby. It's not something I went into in my life, but it's something that really captivates my interest or whatever. And being from a little small town in Mahia, if you guys are familiar with Juneteenth, obviously, then you kind of know a little bit about Mahia. Mahia is a little small town right outside of Waco, Texas, down in Central Texas. Juneteenth, we have the longest continuous celebration of Juneteenth of anywhere in the country, meaning that from the time that Juneteenth started, we've had something that happened on that day somewhere on the grounds there in Mahia. It's approximately 6 miles outside the city limits of Mahia. It's a place actually called Comanche Crossing. At the time, it was next to the Navasota River. When they actually bought the land back in 1898, and the actual first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation within the county was actually held 2.5 miles just to the south. But they bought 30 acres on the Navasota River in 1898 to have a place to actually go and celebrate Juneteenth every year in this one particular spot. It's world renowned. If you read any book about Juneteenth, it's there. But one of the things I think we really need to start talking about is, first of all, what is Juneteenth? And some of the myths kind of surrounding Juneteenth. The first myth that we always hear from everyone is, well, Texas heard 2 years after everybody else that we were free. Well, there are several different ways of looking at that. Anybody know when the war ended? The actual Civil War actually ended? Well, the interesting thing is the war actually didn't end until 1865. It ended actually in April of 1865 when Lee actually surrendered. So you're talking about June 19th, which is actually 2 months afterwards. And a fact about that is the actual end of the actual Civil War was not until 1866, after the last battle was held here in Texas. So paperwork was signed in 1865, but they were still having battles over the Civil War actually here in Texas in 1865. Now, one of the things I think that a lot of us Texans, if you grew up particularly here in the South, you saw a lot of civil war reenactments and all these type things in small towns. I know in East Texas and Central Texas, that's a big thing or whatever. But how many of y'all know how many major battles were actually fought here in Texas during the Civil War? Anybody want to take a guess? How about 4? You would think that there would be more than 4, as many civil war reenactments that you have, but there are actually only 4 major battles that actually took place in the entire state of Texas during the Civil War. Texas was more of a resource state during that particular time period. It was not an actual battle state. So whenever the Confederacy needed supplies, Texas was the place where they would try to get supplies. So there was less Confederate money actually floating in Texas than other places. Texas was actually the place where they were bringing the money from the South to Texas to get the money out of Texas to get supplies from England, who was a supporter of the South, which is really surprising because you have to remember that at that particular time, Britain and the United States were not on the same page as far as politics at that particular point. Britain was still upset that they had given up the United States. So their best way back was to support the Confederacy, which also gets into a little bit of politics because, we don't think of our tie to maybe like a country like India, right? Well, the cotton's being grown here in Texas. The cotton goes to India for processing, and the money goes back to England, and the cycle starts all over again for the Confederate States. So in a roundabout way, our politics here in Texas during the Civil War was a big part of the reason why they were doing that. Okay. And another thing is, why do you think it took so long here in Texas for us to hear the word about what was going on? Okay. There There are several reasons. I mean, let's think about it. The first reason is, think about it. Texas is a farthest state from Washington at that particular moment. You know, other than California, once you get to Texas, you've hit the West. You know, people forget the United States map at the time of the Civil War, what was going on in the Civil War. Once you reach Texas, if you went to the north, Oklahoma was still a territory. Oklahoma did not become a state until 1903. So they're not a part of the United States. So if you go west, New Mexico is still an organized territory. And then if you head south, you run into another foreign country. And once you pass San Antonio, that was disputed territory. So technically, you may have been in Mexico at that particular time. So at that particular point, the only point of getting information in was through the coastline. Was the only way of getting any information or getting supplies out of Texas was through the coastline or right across the Louisiana border, which was a deep South state. But as far as Union actually being able to penetrate Texas, the only way that they would have been able to do that would have been to actually come up through the coast, which is where the order was given by General Granger down at Galveston in 1865 on June 19th, where he actually gave the Emancipation Proclamation. One of the reasons why Texas was one of the last states is, most people don't realize this, is that a lot of people at that particular moment still believe that Texas was because it had been a republic less than 15 years before the war had started, that they could once again become a republic. So even if the South lost, they could become a country again, and they could keep their slaves in Texas. So a lot of people brought their slaves from Tennessee, Georgia. You know, this is the great migration of slaves that came in between 1857 to 1861 into Texas. A lot of us probably arrived during that time period because the slave owners were actually running to Texas, believing that either way the war went, Texas could actually be a place where they could actually keep their slaves. And I know this kind of is a little bit off the beaten path. There were some slave owners when the war came along that still didn't want to give up their slaves, and they actually took their slaves to Brazil. And they're actually called confederados. You may want to look that up at some point, but they're actually African Americans who were taken from this country, who were taken to Brazil. Brazil did not get rid of slavery until 1888, which is like really crazy. There was actually a law written in 1815 for all the countries that Spain actually controlled that actually freed slaves at age 15. But Brazil was controlled by the Portuguese, who did not release their slaves until 1888. So Texas was a big point of people actually leaving this country going south at Juneteenth. So not only was it a celebration of a lot of people getting emancipation, it was also a lot of African Americans who were actually sent south to South America during that time period. Another reason why Texas didn't go, at Juneteenth, didn't get the word as fast as anyone else, especially in the interior, there were no roads in Texas. At the particular point when the United States bought Texas and Texas became a state, there was only one state maintained highway through the entire interior of Texas, and that's the old Spanish Trail. That was the only state funded highway that actually ran through the state of Texas. Everything else in Texas was an old Indian trail and poorly maintained, depending on the rain. Sometimes you could make it, sometimes you couldn't make it. If you look at the geography of how Texas is actually set up, you can actually see how counties are actually set up based on the weather. So when you get into a county like Bosque County and around McLennan County, it's actually based on the rivers surrounding it because the people couldn't get out to actually go anywhere. So in order to have the government, they actually had to, form a government within the rivers so they could actually have an actual government. But like I say, we aren't taught these type things as to the reason why they couldn't actually get into the interior and actually tell people, hey, you're free. Hey, another reason is 99.9% of African Americans were illiterate during this time period. That's a major factor right there. And at the point of when the Civil War actually occurred, Texas only had one major newspaper at that point, and that was a newspaper that was actually in Galveston. That was the only major newspaper. So, you got to remember at this particular time that Dallas is a trail at this particular moment. You know, there's little towns like Tawakoni, which are ghost town now, that were major centers of population, you know, for Texas and places like that. So there was no news that was able to travel in and out because there was no paperwork or no newspapers, no communication into the interior. So all the interior information came via horseback. So if your master got a letter from down south, guess what? He the only one that knew about it. So why would he pay attention to what's going on and tell you anything if he doesn't want to tell you? So that's another major reason. And another major reason is, I think you're from Longview, right? I think you're from Longview, right, Crystal? Okay. Well, at that particular moment, one of the major advantages that the North had over the South was the ability to be able to use telegraph. Well, at this particular moment, there was only one telegraph line in Texas, and it actually ran in the East Texas, barely in the East Texas, and ran back into Louisiana. And that was it. So that was the only form of telegraph that actually came into Texas during that point. So there was no way of getting any mass type of message into the interior Texas either. So, and the Indians cut those lines on a regular, so they couldn't really depend on that mode of communication also. All righty. I got a question for you. Why do they call it Juneteenth? Anybody got a guess why they call it Juneteenth?
They used to call it 19th of June. I don't know who named it Juneteenth.
Okay. Well, actually, Juneteenth actually comes from my hometown of Mahia. In my hometown of Mahia, when we started to celebrate the 19th of June, we actually celebrated 3 days, which is the 17th, 18th, and 19th. So we named it Juneteenth because we actually celebrated those 3 days every year. And they continue to celebrate 3 days every year in Mahia, Texas, which is one of the large, well, at one point was one of the larger Juneteenth places here in Texas or whatever. During my childhood, it would probably be 30,000 people there at a time celebrating Juneteenth. And they would actually camp out and spend the night and just just stay there in that particular spot and celebrate for 3 straight days of Juneteenth. One of the differences of Juneteenth in places like a little town like Mahia or Navasota, we don't move the holiday. Whenever Juneteenth falls on a Wednesday, guess what? That's the day we're celebrating. If it falls on, on a Thursday, we celebrate that day. We don't move it to the weekend. We feel like it's the 4th of July. We don't move our holiday, and we shouldn't be forced to. But the reason why it's called Juneteenth is because it's celebrated on the 17th, 18th, and 19th in Mahia. So as people left the South, they took that name with them, Juneteenth, and spread it around. Instead of the 19th of June, people call it the 19th of June, they carried the name Juneteenth with them as they, got part of the great migrations to the North. Gentlemen joined the Army and things like that. So that's the reason why they call it Juneteenth. It's actually from the small town of Mahia, the 3-day celebration. So that's why they call it Juneteenth. So you guys now know why the holiday is called Juneteenth now. All right. Anybody want to take a guess when Texas finally declared Juneteenth a state holiday?
Was it 86?
No, you were close though. It was actually 1978. There was a freshman senator from Houston named Al Edwards from Houston who actually proposed that Texas have a state holiday called Juneteenth. And we were the first state to do it in 1978 here in Texas. Currently, right now, there are actually 47 states in the union who actually celebrate Juneteenth. And I was looking at earlier at Facebook, and I saw where you had posted that actually the Senate had actually, put it out to actually make it a federal holiday. And the more surprising thing about it is the person actually carried it in the Senate. Can you guys believe that John Cornyn actually carried that in the Senate today to actually be the bill sponsor for Juneteenth to be an actual holiday? I know that's on a whole nother subject and Republican, Democrat, or whatever, but that's a whole nother subject that he actually carried it. And in the House, when it comes up in the House, the 2 people who will be carrying it will be Al Green and also Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston will be the 2 individuals in the House who will actually be carrying the bill hopefully later this week to try to get it passed in the House and hopefully to the president's desk by the 19th. So that's really major news that actually occurred. One person to actually note, in the DFW area, there's a lady over in Fort Worth. Her name is Miss Opal Lee. If you've ever had the opportunity to meet her, she's been banging the drum to get this done since the middle 80s to get Juneteenth to be a holiday. And I really truly hope that she gets a chance to actually see that. Alrighty. I think, back in the past, when we talk about Juneteenth, I can only talk a little bit about my hometown and kind of the experience of how Juneteenth kind of has been in the past. For us, Juneteenth was like Christmas, New Year's, 4th of July, all rolled into one. As a child, we would actually go out to a place called Comanche Crossing. I implore you guys to look that up or whatever. If you put in Comanche, you put in Mahia Juneteenth or whatever, you're actually all going to see the same spot. It's all going to come up. At one point, it was a 30-acre tract. But when the Corps of Engineers decided that the area needed a reservoir, they sold off part of it and they actually flooded 10 acres of it. So it's only 20 acres now. So part of it is now covered by a lake at this particular point. But what would happen is, like I mentioned earlier, everyone would come out there and it was like the biggest family reunion that you've ever been to in your life, because people would literally pull up travel trailers. They would put up tents. Every hotel was full. Every house floor was packed in the city, the whole entire area, because it was the place to be. It was nothing to see major stars from, the major football teams in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, or whatever, to actually be walking the grounds there when I was a kid. That was just, you had to be at Juneteenth in Mahia. At some point, you had to make it to Mahia at some point. But like I was mentioning earlier, the reason why it was called Juneteenth is because you went there and you stayed. There was no, I'm leaving, let's kick it for a couple of hours, let's have this little cute program. No, you actually stayed there at that particular location. And I wish I had some pictures to guys kind of show you, but we actually built a pavilion there that was actually built in 1898. And in the bottom was all businesses. So people bid it on stands and they had vendors on the bottom. So you could buy anything that you want to eat. You want fish, you want barbecue, you want slices of watermelon, you want whatever you wanted was down there. A lot of you guys like Big Red Soda Water. They kind of give Mahia credit for putting them on the map, because people would take Big Red Soda that was invented in Waco and kind of spreaded it around the country after coming to the Juneteenth Festival there in Mahia. Another thing, there's a frozen confectionery called the Pink Thing. If you guys have ever been to Six Flags, you guys have probably had a Pink Thing ice cream maybe. This is another confectionery that was kind of pushed across the country from the Juneteenth Festival. And they give credit to the Juneteenth Festival there in Mahia. And at the top of the concession stands where all these businesses are or whatever, they had a dance hall on top. So you would go up there and there would be bands who would actually come and play on top or whatever. And it would be one continuous party all day, all night. You come out, get you something to eat, drink, and you go back up again and you party or whatever. In the daytime, the kids could go hang out up in the dance hall, and at nighttime, it was adults, and whatever they did in there, they did in there. But at the same time, there was a church pavilion right next to this building. And they had 24-hour church. I don't know if you guys have ever seen 24-hour church where one preacher gets through preaching, they shout for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then they move and another preacher gets up and his congregation does the same thing. And then 2 o'clock in the morning, another preacher gets up and does the same thing. And then somebody has sunrise service all day long. So you have the devil over here, got you over here dancing on one side. And on the opposite side, you got a pavilion over here with preachers and people falling out over here in the pavilion over here on the opposite side. And this would go on for 3 continuous days. So that's why I call it Christmas, New Year's, 4th of July, all at the same time. But the story behind why they picked that location is when the Emancipation Proclamation actually happened, there was a large slave owner there named Logan Stroud, and he had 24 families. And Logan was a little bit different than most slave owners in that he actually voted against seceding from the Union. And he was known to be, well, we don't know exactly what he may have been. We do know he had a daughter, but we don't know. Like say, he was very liberal for his time at that particular moment. Let's just put it that way. But he allowed his slaves to celebrate on the property on the day that it happened. And those 24 families that he owned decided that every year that they would come back and commemorate Juneteenth every year at that particular spot. Those 24 families are the ones who raised the money to buy the land, the acreage to actually host Juneteenth. And on that particular property, there are oak trees that are scattered across the 30 acres. Well, some of them are gone because some of them were flooded. But even to this day, people still put their name on the trees, like they put their family name on that particular tree. And those oak trees represent the original 24 families who were actually in that particular location or whatever. So that's kind of a tie back to the original Juneteenth celebration there or whatever. Another reason why Juneteenth really took off there in Mexia and actually was a stable place for them to have Juneteenth. Mexia was kind of Limestone County at that particular moment was a different kind of place from other places. Before Texas even was admitted into the Union, they sent a representative named Ralph Long to the Texas House or whatever. Ralph Long was very interesting. There's a town called Springfield that he actually built there in that particular area. They had a pharmacy, they had a doctor, they had a school. The school was actually named after his wife, Kate Long. And it was actually a Black community there in Springfield. But at the same time, we also had, unlike many other places, we actually had a Black sheriff who was actually appointed to that particular area, who actually came from Marshall, and his name was Merrick Trammell. And he was actually appointed as the state police in that particular area. So not only that, they had Black protection for their celebrations in that particular area. And when Texas was actually readmitted in 1870 into the Union after Juneteenth was actually, after they were admitted back into the Union, Limestone County was able to send 2 Black legislators from that particular area, which is like rare for a small area to actually be able to have 2. Even though the county was split in half, they still had 2 individuals who were able to go, which was one of my relatives. There was Giles Cotton, and there was another one named David Medlock, who were both sent down to the Texas House. So not only that, they were able to actually spread the word about Juneteenth to people around them and tell them about the 19th of June there. And this is kind of how we have the creation of the large celebration in Mexia, and the word of Juneteenth kind of started to spread across Texas. The longest continuous celebrations happen in this little town called Navasota, Mexia, and also Galveston. Those are the only 3 who have been consistent about it. A lot of people don't understand that Juneteenth actually fell off in the state of Texas during the 30s and 40s and early 50s because of African Americans wanting to forget about slavery at that particular moment. And so a lot of places stopped having Juneteenth celebrations in the late 30s. And of course, the war came along in the 40s or whatever, and in the 50s. So there were a lot of places who got rid of their Juneteenth celebrations. And then you guys have to understand the Black Pride movement didn't start to come back into the United States until the mid 60s, when Black Pride started to pick up again. And then, people are starting to pick up the Juneteenth holiday. So we have to thank God that these little small towns kept this thing going. And so we know about Juneteenth, and it's growing into this big monster that it is. Fun fact, who has the largest Juneteenth parade in the country? Anybody want to take a shot?
Is it Philadelphia?
Okay.
Or in the news, I know you told me you all used to, but in the news when I did, I think it was either Brooklyn or Philadelphia. They just said that recently.
Exactly. It's not even in Texas anymore. They have bigger celebrations outside of Texas than they do here. The largest one parade, Juneteenth parade that they have now is actually in Midland, Texas. Here in Texas, as far as actually having a Juneteenth parade. And San Antonio, San Antonio actually has the largest Martin Luther King parade in the country, which you would not think San Antonio would be like that. But these two places that don't have large populations of African Americans celebrate Juneteenth harder than places that we do. Places like Milwaukee have large Juneteenth celebration. In recent years, California has taken off. In places like Los Angeles, Juneteenth is now, in some places, become as big as the 4th of July in some areas. You know, with city councils actually passing for fireworks and things like that in certain cities across the country. So, you know, we're talking about something that was very small, starting in small places, kept alive by some small towns here in Texas, that now here we sit in 2021 talking about our little obscure day that everybody got on us talking about, oh, y'all are so dumb and y'all waited 2 years to learn or whatever. Well, guess what? Y'all all just about to celebrate it becoming a national holiday for everyone in the United States. And with that, Crystal, it's your show. Like I say, glad to talk to you guys a little bit. Hope you guys learned a little bit. You guys have any questions? I'm more than happy to answer any questions I can, or, you know, whatever I can do. I also run the site Texas Black Politics. If you guys are into politics, join me anytime you guys want to. I put out information every day. But like I say, Crystal, glad you invited me. Thank you.
Well, before you close, I'm sorry. I need you to give us at least 2 more minutes or so and tell us about the tragedy on Lake Mejia or on Camacho Trail, the 1981. You told me about. You didn't tell us that part.
Okay. Like I say, I didn't know if you guys want to keep it upbeat, but actually in 1981, there was a major tragedy that happened in my little small town, Mejia. For years, people like my dad and his friends had tried to get rid of this 1-lane bridge that crossed over Lake Mejia when the lake was flooded, coming over the Navasota River. It was actually flooded. So the 10 acres I talked about earlier was actually flooded, but they never replaced the bridge, and the bridge was a 1-lane bridge. If you guys ever passed over a bridge that was made out of wood and you rolled over it and the boards actually came up as you went across it, this is the type of bridge that we're talking about. You're also talking about 5,000 to 10,000 cars that are passing over this 1-lane bridge, and you literally had to sit on both sides of the bridge as one or the other car passed over the bridge. Well, on a particular night, in the past, of course, with any celebration, there's always going to be a knucklehead or two. That's always going to happen. Well, in this particular year, the sheriff's office decided that they wouldn't come out there in uniform. They would actually come out ununiform and actually work undercover out there and try to be on scene or whatever. Well, subsequently, in 1981, I know it sounds really crazy now, but marijuana was a big deal back then. You know, you could actually go to the pen for a long time for having a joint. And these sheriff's deputies came across this car with actually 4 black teens in the car, but 3 of them took credit for the actual weed in the particular car. And instead of putting them in a car and transporting them back across the river, they actually decided to carry them on a boat back across the lake to a car that was going to be waiting on them to transport them back to the county seat of Groesbeck. Well, the boat was only made for 4 people, but there were 6 people on board. None of the individuals on the boats had life jackets on this particular boat, and we're talking about a very dark time crossing the lake. You know, I mean, we're talking night or whatever. So witnesses on the scene saw them put handcuffs on them as they were getting ready to put them on the boat. They saw them walk them across the ground in handcuffs. This is where the story gets a little bit different, a little bit. Some people say that they took the handcuffs off, but the majority of people said that they didn't take the handcuffs off. But some people said they did take the handcuffs off. Unknown. The strange thing about it of the 3 teens on the boat, one of them was a lifeguard at the city pool. So if he would have fell into the water, you would think that he would be able to make it back up to the land. Another one was known to be a strong swimmer. The other individual, he was actually from Mejia, but he had moved to Dallas and graduated, but his family was still there in Mejia, and he was actually visiting for the weekend. They were all in grade, so they were all hanging out, for the weekend at Juneteenth, like every other kid there at that particular. Well, they get into the water with the 3 deputies, and the boat capsizes inside of the actual lake. All 3 of the officers survived. All 3 of the teens died at that particular moment. I was a small kid at that particular time. I was actually out there. Like I told you, everybody stayed out there. So everybody was out there. You from ahead, you were just out there at that particular moment. A lot of confusion that night. It was a lot of stuff going on that night. It got pretty rough out there. There were people trying to get out of there. They were trying to, because it just became an unsafe environment. But the problem came in is them actually retrieving the bodies and how they actually retrieved the bodies out of the lake. They had boats circling, the locations as the bodies started to come up and started to float. They would actually cover up the area that they were actually bringing the bodies up. So if the cuffs came off or they took them off, nobody knows, but, based off, general information, you would think that some of these individuals would have survived. At least one out of the 3 would have survived. If all 3 deputies survived, at least one of them would have survived at some point coming up or whatever. That's just, the odds are astronomical that all 3 of them would actually die at that particular moment. But like I say, as they brought them up, they would circle them, and bring them out of the water at that particular moment. They were originally carried to a coroner in Waco, who said that there were no handcuffs on them, but nobody really believed that. There were, like I said, there were numerous witnesses that said that they were, had handcuffs on them. Subsequently, another one was held, and there was a possibility that there was some trauma to the hands, so there was a possibility of being some handcuffs on there. The funeral director, who actually did the bodies, said that the hands were folded into a point that it looks like that at some point there must have been something on there, because when the rigor mortis set in on the hands, which means that your body starts to do what it does, that there must have been type of trauma where to the point where they were in the water, and when it came up, your body stays in whatever position it's in at that particular moment. So, you have to remember it's the early 80s, in Texas, and if you guys grew up in Texas, you guys have to remember that the wheels of justice were different, as far as being in a small town or whatever, and when you get justice. Subsequently, they were never charged with that particular crime. They were charged with another crime. And at a point, they were all able to eventually beat those particular. And today, 2021, all 3 of them retired, worked careers, worked at other jobs, did everything that they would normally do in life. And nothing was ever done about this. It never happened. So it really put a damper on the Juneteenth celebration there in Mejia. And it's something that my small town has had to live with forever. It really changed the fabric of my small town at that particular moment and into the future. It really did. But that's what occurred. And suddenly they find money to replace the bridge, after all those years. It's amazing what happens when you have tragedy and they decided, oh, we really need to do something about it. My dad and his friends actually went out for years, go to the county commissioner's office and actually say, hey guys, we need to, fix the bridge, and nothing ever happened. This is what happened, so, but like I say, all 3 of them drowned. It made national news, international news, for a long That's all my town was known for, was not the Juneteenth celebration, but the tragedy of what happened in 1981 at Juneteenth.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Daniel, this was awesome information. A lot of stuff that even me being from Texas, I didn't know. Does anyone have any questions? First, let's give Daniel, Mr. Keelan, a hand. You all give him a hand clap. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for him or comments?
Yes, I have one. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us, Ms. Wiggs.
Yes, first meeting. Very interesting information. Daniel, I remember there was another case down in Mahia of an African-American man that was out drinking beer on a truck with his white co-workers, and that he ended up on the back of the truck being drugged down the road, and he died.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not
familiar. On the news.
Are you sure that wasn't Jasper?
Oh, it's Jasper.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did get that confused. That was Jasper.
Yes.
No, that wasn't my small town.
I'm so sorry, but you know, there's so many different things that happen in all these towns, including Dallas, Texas.
Well, you know,
they haven't been captured, but these stories need to be told, and I thank you for sharing yours.
Yeah, we have a lot of things to be proud of about our hometown. I mean, you guys see people from my hometown all the time on television, you know. You guys may remember the coach of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers, Ray Rhodes. You know, he's from my hometown, African-American gentleman. If you guys watch the show if you guys like those adventure shows, there's a guy they call the Pig Man who actually goes out and hunts hog from like all those type places, whatever. You have Kelvin Beacham, who's a player in the NFL now. If you guys use your cell phone, actually one of my classmates, every time you use your cell phone, he actually holds one of the patents for one of the operating systems, the IEE system, you know, 82.1. IEE. He actually wrote that particular program. So every time you use your cell phone, you're using one of his programs. So, you know, we have a lot of things to be proud of about our small towns. This particular incident did take my hometown down, but we didn't let it break our spirit when it came to celebrating Juneteenth, because we understand the true meaning of Juneteenth. Other individuals may have left us behind, you know, and not celebrated with us, but it didn't stop us from celebrating Juneteenth. So maybe we don't have 20,000, maybe we're not like when I was a kid, maybe we only have 5,000, maybe we only have 1,000 some year, but we still continue to carry the spirit of Juneteenth with us every year.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments?
Hi, this is Paige. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. So I grew up in Southern Georgia, and you know why it's very important for us to preserve our history and make sure our children are being taught facts. I actually didn't learn about Juneteenth until I was stationed. I want to say when I was stationed in El Paso around 2008, and I'm not even sure if I learned about it then because I was still in the military. And so for me, I was telling someone, I was like, hey, you know, that's been a side effect of being a Black person growing up in, you know, Southern Georgia, where they teach you what they want you to know. And so for me, it was something that I came into celebrating late and really didn't know as much about it as you've taught me tonight. And so I'm really grateful for that. You did say something tonight. You said, hey, in 1980, the wheels of justice were turning slow. You know, it's 2021. I want to tell everybody stay vigilant because they are still turning just as slow. And if you have a website to is it Black Texas Politics?
Yeah, on Facebook or Instagram, you go on and join. I put out information during the session, during the Texas session. I actually follow them. I'm the only African-American who actually follows them on day-to-day and puts out information on actual bills that are happening, when bills are happening. I actually put out actual petitions that are being passed by actual representatives. You know, we try to do as much as we can to try to get information out to the public as to what's happening, you know, within the state of Texas. You know.
Well, thank you for that, because that's a lot of work, because a lot of bills come out every single session. But I just wanted to personally say thank you, because I was getting goosebumps when you were talking. And I'm not, you know, ashamed to be transparent. Like I said, I grew up in Southern Georgia, and people taught us what they wanted us to know. And it wasn't until I graduated college at 33, that's when I really got the full scope of our American history, and I had to pay thousands of dollars to get it. So thank you for tonight.
Right. And that's talking about the 1619 project and kind of how things are kind of happening, across the United States. Well, for us in Texas, for us, our history here starts in 1513 with a guy named Estevanico. In your history books, they call him Esteban. They Americanized his name, but his name is Estevanico. He's actually the first African who was actually here in Texas, and he was along with Cabeza de Vaca here in Texas or whatever. Christy, if you got a second, I'll tell a short little history, synopsis of Texas a little bit. As our lessons in Texas, the strange about Texas is when Stephen F. Austin when Moses Austin actually came into Texas to actually start his colonies here in the 1800s. The first thing that the Mexican government told him was, you cannot bring slaves into the state of Texas. Okay, Moses Austin passes away, and his son Stephen F. takes up the role of what Moses was to bring people into the state of Texas. One thing that's taught in the state of Texas about the old 300, the first 300 families that brought into Texas, they push those particular things. Well, those 300, they had slaves in the United States. Well, the Mexican government has told them that they can't bring slaves into the United States. So what do? They create indentured servants out of African Americans. So they have them sign these bogus contracts that, hey, you're going to be an apprentice to be a cotton picker, but you're going to work for me for 99 years and you're going to owe me $20. Well, first of all, when you get to Texas, there's not going to be any money because there's no Americans. There was no way to make any money. And you have to work for the rest of your life as an apprentice in order to pay for your food and board that they're barely giving you. So that's how they're bringing African Americans into Texas. So when we talk about our Texas independence, the real reason why Texas left Mexico was because in 1829, as more and more people are coming from the United States, Mexico does a very interesting thing, and I implore you guys to look at it. Henry Louis Gates actually has a great documentary called Black Grandma in the Closet. It's by Henry Louis Gates. It was produced by PBS. Mexico gets their first native Black president, mulatto president, by the name of Vicente Guerrero. So not only are they answering to the Mexican government, they are now answering to a native-born mulatto by the name of Vicente Guerrero, who becomes the first Black president on this continent, basically, besides in Haiti. But he's actually a Black president here. And one of the things that he starts to do is look into Coahuila, which was Texas at that particular moment, and looking at the slaves being brought in by the people of Texas. And he starts to crack down on the Texans who were enslaving people and looking at the contracts that were, unenforceable, making these people, indentured servants for 99 years. And the Mexicans, like I say, they don't teach us much in Texas history, but the Mexican soldiers would tell people as they roll up on them, hey, you're free. Whenever, people would come in from Mexico City marching into Texas. Now, the government here in Texas that the Mexicans had or whatever was corrupt, so they just looked the other way. But like I said, but when the actual troops would come up from Mexico City or from, south of the border, south of San Antonio and come into the interior of Texas, they were actually letting these people know. And this angered the landowners to the point where they didn't like this. It was an open secret that you don't take your slaves to the San Antonio area because they're not coming back. You have, that was just an open secret because they were actually free. And, when they tell the story of the Alamo, they don't tell the story that they tell the story of everybody dying in the Alamo. That's not true. The only two people that would survive, there were some women survived in the Alamo, but the only two men that survived the Alamo were two Black slaves. One of them was named Joe, and the other They don't know his name, but those were the only two survivors of the Alamo at that particular moment. And even when they caught Santa Anna, we all know the story of Santa Anna, when they caught him under the tree. We've all heard of the Yellow Rose of Texas. Guess who Santa Anna was with? He was with a Black woman. Her name's Emily West. They called her name was Emily West.
Wow.
She's actually the Yellow Rose of Texas. If you go back and you look at the old songs of the Yellow Rose of Texas, they nasty as all HE double hockey sticks, but they're all talking about this yellow woman that Santa Anna was with. So a lot of what Texas history is taught to us is not complete in what they're actually teaching us. They only tell us a part of the story. Yeah, they call Santa Anna, but with a woman named Emily West, who was a mulatto, one from Massachusetts, actually. And she actually went back north after, at a certain point. But yeah, she was a mulatto. So.
And that's why we open up our meetings with our Black History Moment. So thank you, Mr. Keelan. You all give Mr. Keelan a hand. Thank you all. If you all have any other comments or questions for him, drop them in the chat. Someone has already asked for you to share your information. I know you said it, but if you can drop some information in the chat, maybe some links, that would be great as well. So again, thank you so much for being our guest today. And with no further ado, you all, I know we're a little bit over, but please promise you all will stay on. I'm going to go through all our announcements and stuff very, very quickly because we need to formally do our delegate nominations for the convention. So please promise me you all was hanging here, and I'll be real quick with everything else. So we can do, what did I just do? So we can do our delegations. I'm trying to multitask. Okay. So join a committee. We have our legal redress team, our health team, Black Business Friday, political action team, our education team, and economic justice and empowerment. If you email, if you go to www.dfwmetro.naacp.org, you can opt in for our communications and you can get all this good information as to how you can connect. Also, definitely connect with our Facebook page. That's also going to give you plenty of information about what we're doing and how you can get connected, because we want to see you all outside of our meetings as well. So also, we are looking for representatives in all of our cities to show up for the city council meetings. Most of those meetings are virtual now, but we need someone that can dedicate themselves and commit to watch the city council meetings in Grapevine, Louisville, Flower Mound, Capel, and Carrollton. We need at least 2 to 3 people for all of those cities. Those are the cities in our jurisdiction. And also we need the same thing for our school districts. We have our Colleyville, Grapevine ISD, Carrollton, Formers Branch ISD, Louisville ISD, and Capel ISD. We need 2 to 3 people in all of those areas as well. If you have not registered for the upcoming, I can't get to the chat. For the upcoming national convention, just dropped everything in the chat. Go ahead and get registered now. We want to make sure everybody gets registered for the virtual national convention of the NAACP. And also our education team has a meeting. Our wonderful Ms. Paige Dixon is on the call tonight. They did have their kickoff meeting, I think, a week ago. And so they're going to have another meeting on June the 21st at 7 p.m. So make sure you make plans to tune in for that particular meeting. We have a Juneteenth volunteer meeting for those of you who are going to be participating in the voter registration drive, and also our membership drive this Saturday at Music City Mall. That's going to be exciting. It is going to be presented by Lane's Den. It's going to start at 2:30. This is the little flyer. Y'all take a camera out, take a picture. It'll be at the main stage at the Louisville Mall. And here are some of the activities. If you want to take a picture of this, you know what? I think I can paste this on the Facebook page, but this kind of gives an idea. They're going to have a fashion show. They got a comedy show and some other performances and stuff. And guess what? Our DFW Metro group will be there as well. So you all tune into that. If you have youth that are interested in being a part of our Black History Moment, being a presenter, get some community service credit and stuff, send us an email so we can get your youth plugged in. For that, if you know anybody who needs food, there are people that still need some assistance. Take a snapshot of this information. There are a couple that are weekly at St. Anne's in Capel, Westside Baptist Church in Louisville, and then Friendship West has one. Metrocrest, now I don't know. I'll have to check that. I'll have to post that and make sure all of those are still current. So this is the part that you all have been waiting for. So I told you all I was going to do the announcements really, really quick. So let me start